Welcome to the Error Handling Challenge solution. This is our starter code, so let's jump right in and look at the basic solution. So let's start with running this and seeing that right away we get this exception that says system.indexOutOfRange exception. You can't buy 0 items. So right away we know we have a problem calling this make payment method, which we knew we were going to have. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to wrap just this line in the try catch. Now I have seen some people say, well, let's just wrap the whole thing in a try catch. And you could do that. The problem is that that's inefficient and it's imprecise. So instead, let's wrap just this line right here. So right click on it and say snippet, surround with, and type out try and tab. There we go. So that puts the line we're talking about into the try area, and then we can catch this exception. So right now we're not going to catch which exception it is. We're just going to say, yes, it's an exception because we don't care. And that's something, if you don't care, don't create the variable. Next, you notice we have this error message down here because the result does not exist in the current context. And so I have two options here. Either I can move this into the try, or I can create this result outside of the try. Now, this is going to be a transaction model, so let's just do this. Like so. And then I can do this. It's actually still going to yell at me because this is not assigned to yet, possibly. Therefore, I'm going to say equals null, and that should work. So now, with this being set up the way it is, it's just going it just returned a null value. That's different than throwing an exception. So this is the error handling in our code versus just exception handling of it blew up. Now this is blowing up. We want to change this because it's an error in how we process things. And that's a subtle difference, but it is a difference. When you have a tool that you're using, if you give it bad data, it's going to throw an exception possibly. Well, it should. And you need to handle that. But sometimes you just say, well, can I not give it bad data? And you fix that error instead of just trying to wrap things in a try catch and handle what you could just fix yourself. So this we can fix. I think the best way to handle this is to wrap this, so surround a snippet, surround with an if statement and say result is not equal to null. And the reason I did this is because I don't want anything to be printed if we have a null value. We're just not going to print anything. And we can also say, well, print something else instead. But the other option is to put the question mark here, which will prevent the error, but what will happen is it will print the right line without any value in it. And we don't want that. So let's just put an else here and say, and I didn't say you had to do this in the assignment, but let's do something and say null value for item. I didn't put my $sign again. Put my $sign in front. Null value for item number, or whatever the number is. So let's run this again. And this time it all works. So we skip for 0. We got a null value for 0, for item 0, which is interesting. We got a payment skipped for 0 items and a null value. And the reason why is because, let's look at the code here for a minute. Because we're doing a try and then we're writing this result, that's a problem in that really we don't want to have this be null for a good reason or for an invalid reason, like this catch here. And so we have a couple options here. And this simulates kind of the real world struggle you have to think through. Let's go ahead and stop this. Do you say move this up into your try? Maybe, because it kind of does depend on it. But maybe there's code in between that we don't want to wrap in our try catch, in which case we have to do something differently. So I think for this, what we're going to do is I'm actually going to move this whole bit of code right here up into our try. But I still want to check for that null. So let's run this again. So now this whole bit of code is inside the try as well. So if we have an exception up here, it's going to drop down here and skip to the next one. Let's run it again. And payment skipped for payment with 0 items. Then here's 3 or 4 values. Then we skipped one. We had number 6 was null. So we still have that one null entry in there. And then we skipped 5, 8, 9, and 10 as well. So we skipped 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 items. We displayed the values for 5 others, and we had null value for one of the items. So that kind of tackles a little bit more tricky, but it's still just, the basics of error handling. If we didn't have this, let's just kind of demonstrate this. We kind of went about it in a way that you might not have done. If we comment this out, so if I just moved both of these lines into the try, this is what we get. So we have these payments right here, but notice we're kind of missing one. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 items here. We skipped a payment for item 6, but that's not really true. Because don't forget that that result was null. It didn't throw an exception. The exception happened when we got to this line, and that was a bit of the difference. So we need to make sure that this line right here is inside an if statement because it can be null. So now we run this again. It correctly says there's a null value for item 6. So that's the basics of error handling. Now let's talk about the advanced. The advanced says we want to handle things differently. And so in order to do that, we have to catch different exceptions. So let's start with a basic exception. Let's call it just EX. That gives it a variable name, which we're going to use to figure out if there's an inner exception. So this will capture the basic items. And now let's do this. And I'm going to say right here, we're going to make it just say a space, and then we'll say ex.innerException.message. Now here's the problem. If the inner exception is null, that's going to have an issue. In fact, if we run this, let's just do it. It's going to crash right there. Object reference not set to an instance of an object. So inner exception is null. But this is where the question mark will help us. And what the question mark does is says, if this is not null, grab this property. Otherwise, stop right here. Don't do it. We run this again. And there we go. Now notice for item number 9, we have a hard time multiplying odd numbers. So there's that inner exception we're looking for. Okay. Now, that captures all the exceptions, but we don't want to do that. So let's start off with the catching the index out of range. So another catch. And we'll say index out of range exception. We can give it the same name. So now we can say is our console write line, and the index out of range message is skipped invalid record. And we'll do that same curly brace. I forgot my $ in front again. I'll learn one of these days. So ex.innerException question mark dot message. So we're going to print that message at the end if there is an inner exception. So there we go. So now we're going to catch the index out of range exception separately. So we'll catch that first. If it's not an index out of range, we'll drop down to the exception. Now let's just run this again to verify. And we have skipped invalid record right at the top. Because item 0 is an invalid record because it's indexed out of range. So we caught that. So now here's a tricky one. Let's go ahead and catch the format exception. We'll say EX, but here's the tricky bit. We need to catch this only if the I is not 5. So we'll say when I is not equal to 5. And now we can do our message. So our message for this is going to be, $ first. Remember this time. Formatting issue. And we'll do that ex.innerException question mark dot message. And then I'll say formatting issue in the inner exception if there is one, but only if the I is not equal to 5. Otherwise, it's going to drop down and print this out here. So let's run this again. And notice that we have a formatting issue. We have a formatting issue with an inner exception. But we don't have the formatting issue right here with number 5. And that was a formatting issue. Just to kind of prove that this is the true, let's take away that when clause, that filter. Let's run it again. And notice number 5 is a formatting issue. So adding in that when clause allows us to filter out certain values or filter in certain values depending on how we write our statement right here, which is a true-false statement. It's like an if statement. So that's the more advanced error handling. So we start off with the basics of just wrapping in a try catch, but only putting our one value here and our value that used that. So those 2 lines essentially in the try catch. We put the second line in its own if because we wanted to fix that error. We didn't want that error coming through. And then what we did was we went on to the more advanced case where we had multiple catches and we filtered one catch based upon the values at the time of the exception. And for all of them, we grabbed the inner exception if there was one and put the message at the end. And that wraps up the error handling challenge. I hope you enjoyed it, and don't forget to come back next week for your next challenge.